everybody, and welcome back to Not Weave Stitch. My name is Gisela, and in this week's episode we're going to discuss how to get you started and set up with your first frame loom. So in previous episodes we discussed about the different types of looms that you can get. We discussed a little bit about the tools that you would need them and some of the materials as well. We talked a little bit about the affordability and the environmental impact of loom weaving. And then in a recent episode, we also discussed about weaving terminology, trying to make it a little bit easier to understand, because I know sometimes some of the terminology sounds very complex and it can be very hard to understand it. So hopefully that episode has helped there. But with this week's episode, I wanted to discuss actually how to get your loom set up. So I will be discussing about a frame loom. Every loom will be different. There are lots of different types of looms, but a frame loom is one of the beginner ones that you would use. Again, even with a frame loom, they do come in different varieties and there are different ways to set it up. So please don't take this as what you must do with it, but this is just a suggestion of how to get your frame set up. There are different ways, of course, and it's completely up to you what instruction you want to take from it, but I will be discussing today about how I set up my frame loom. Now, when I say setting up a loom, as we discussed in one of the previous episodes, it is called warping a loom. So to get it set up and to be able to weave on the loom, we need to warp it first. So before you even start to warp it, you need to get the suitable material. So as discussed previously, when you are warping a loom, you want to make sure the material that you're using is strong enough. So I would suggest a smooth, strong cotton or linen, yarn, string, cord, whatever it may be, but it needs to be strong enough. And this is the key thing here, because we need a really good tension of our warp. We don't want something that could snap or something that is too soft or loose. We also don't want anything too textured as well, so something smooth and strong would be perfect for a warp string. Now, depending on your frame loom, there are obviously different types. The one I'm talking about today doesn't have the heddle on it, so that bar that goes across to open up your strings to get the shed. I'm literally just talking a simple frame loom without that. So with this frame loom, the first thing that I would do is I would take the end of your warp cotton or your warp linen that you're using, and we're going to tie it around the first two notches. Now, me personally, I like to start on the bottom left hand side. So we're going to loop around from the first notch at the bottom round into the second notch, and we're going to tie a tight double knot. Now, sometimes when I say notches, some frame looms have like little pegs instead. So you can apply the same thing here. So it would go around the first peg between the first slit and the second slit. So you're tying a nice tight double knot around the first and second notch, or around the first and second slit around a peg. I always make sure that I leave a decent tail of a couple of centimetres or a couple of inches where I have just made my knots, and I pop that tail through to the back, and we can always neaten that up later on. We're then going to take the rest of that string and we're going to bring it up to the very top left hand notch. And when you're pulling it up to the top, make sure that you have good tension. So don't leave it too loose. We want to make sure that we're giving it a decent pull as we take it to the top. You're then going to loop it around the outside of the notch, and you're going to go round into the second notch at the top left. So we're going to go into the first notch in the top left hand corner. We then take it around the outside into the second notch in the top left hand corner, and then we're going to bring it back down again. Now this is the only time that it's going to go back into the same notch that it was in before. So it's going to go into the second notch in the bottom left-hand corner. And there will already be some string in there, but this is the only time we're going to go back into it. So put it down to the bottom in the second notch. Again, think about your tension here. Give it a good pull. We want a good tension on our warp string. We're then going to take it round the outside and it's going to go into the third notch at the bottom. Once we've done that, it's going to go up to the third notch at the top. Once we've taken it to the third notch at the top, it's going to go around the outside into the fourth notch at the top and back down to the bottom. And we're going to continue this across our loom. We're going to go up around the outside, down around the outside, and we're going to keep on going into the next free available notch. So it's kind of like making a big S pattern, going up around the outside, down around the outside. Now, as you're doing this, make sure that there isn't any slack. We want to make sure that we have good tension. So sometimes I do run my finger up and down those strings there just to make sure that I have pulled them tight enough. And once you reach the end, you should go back down to the bottom right last notch, and we're going to tie again a nice tight double knot. Now this can be tricky sometimes, so what we do is we go into the very last bottom right notch and we kind of go back on ourselves. So we go around the outside back to the previous notch and we're going to make a nice tight double knot to finish up our warp. Again, the tight double knot will be sitting on the inside of the loom and we're going to leave a nice tail. So again, a couple of centimeters, a few inches, and we're going to snip that away from the ball of string. And any excess tails that you have, just push through to the back of the loom. So we can check if we've done this nicely, and you want to make sure that all of your warp strings are relatively tight. We don't want any of them sagging down or having any slack. So do check your work there, but it's better to do that as you go along. But that should be your loom nicely warped up and ready to go. Now, sometimes frame looms also have metal rods, and they sometimes have a metal rod for each side. So it usually comes with 2 metal rods in some kits, not in all kits. So you can use them, and it's basically to make sure that when you are working on your weaving project that it doesn't start pulling inwards, so it keeps it nice and stretched out. Now, if you do have metal rods included, you don't need to use them, but if you do, you're going to put them in the first notch on the left hand side, so the first notch at the bottom left and the first notch in the top left, and you're going to screw these nice and tightly into those notches. Then the second rod will go into the very last notches, so it will go into the bottom right last notch and the top right last notch, and again you're going to screw that nice and tight. Now, sometimes some people also like to pop a bit of card or paper through the back of the loom right at the bottom. So I've done this sometimes. I get a little strip of card a couple of centimeters wide and I push that to the bottom of my loom. And basically what it does is it gives you space so that when you finish up your project, you have enough of your warp strings at the bottom to be able to take it off of the loom and tie it up potentially. Now, this isn't necessary to do, but it's completely up to you. It can help sometimes depending on your project there. So that might be something you want to think about, adding a little bit of card or a little bit of paper to the bottom of your loom. Now, this would be a very similar process if you were doing a cardboard loom. So with a cardboard loom, you would cut the notches and you would measure out the same distance between each notch. So let's say 1 centimeter between each notch at the bottom and at the top of your cardboard. So I would cut out a rectangular piece of cardboard and then I would make similarly distanced notches in the bottom and then the same distance notches at the top of the cardboard. You would then take again your warp string. Again, you want to make sure that it's nice and strong. And you would make a knot in the bottom left first notch. and you would pop your string into that notch and you would take it up to the top left notch. You then go around the back, so around the outside, into the second notch at the top. You then bring it straight back down to the second notch in the bottom left. Go round the back of the cardboard into the third notch in the bottom left, and then straight back up to the top to the third notch at the top. You would then keep on going up round the back of the notches, straight down and round the back again. So a very similar technique to a frame loom. And again, you want to make sure that you're thinking about the tension here. So really good tension to make sure that your warp strings are nice and tight, that there isn't any slack in them. Again, you would usually finish in the bottom right, and I would make a nice knot in the bottom right notch, and I would snip it away from the ball of string, again leaving a little bit of a tail. Now, before you start your weaving, you usually will have something known as a shuttle or a boat shuttle, and this is basically what stores your yarn or material that you're going to use to weave into your loom. Now, usually as a beginner, you just would get a stick shuttle, and what you see with those is it usually has 2 slits on either end of the stick. You can even make your own out of like a lollipop stick and cut 2 slits, one at either end. And what you would do is you would take the material that you're working with, and you can pretty much use any materials here. So lovely yarns, you can even work with ribbons, all sorts of different thicknesses. It doesn't matter here about strength. You can really have a nice play around and get creative with the materials that you're using. But you can wrap it and wind this up around the shuttle. So you're basically loading the shuttle. So I'd pop the end of my yarn, leaving a little bit of a tail, into one of the slits. Then I go down the shuttle into the bottom slit. I'd go round the back and back up to the top slit, and I'd keep on going round and round the shuttle, loading it up. You can put as much of your yarn on here as it will allow. You will probably want to think about how much you need for your project, and you also don't want it too bulky because otherwise it can make it a little bit more difficult to weave through your loom. But that is how to set up your shuttle ready for your weaving. And lastly, you might see that sometimes a comb is included in these frame loom kits. And the comb is going to be used for when you start your weaving. So it basically pushes it down to make much more compact and neater rows. So you can have that ready to go there once you start your weaving. Now, this is just one way of setting up a frame loom. Like I said earlier, there are different ways. Everyone has their own preferences, and there are all sorts of different frame looms as well. Like I said earlier, some have the heddle in them, some don't, some have pegs rather than notches. There's all sorts of different types. If you want to see a video to accompany this podcast episode, I do have a video of how to set up a frame loom on my YouTube channel. So if you go on to Gisela Narten, that's GISELA NARTEN, and on my channel in my loom weaving playlist there is a video on how to get your frame loom set up and ready to go. So I discuss how to warp it, and sometimes it's better to see it visually happening, so I will include a link to that in the description underneath this podcast episode as well. I hope this episode has been helpful there to help you get started setting up and warping your frame loom. I will in a future episode discuss the beginner weaving techniques, so the main ones that you want to know, and hopefully that will break it down to help you get started. And again, I will include video links to my YouTube channel just in case you'd like to see that in action as well. So not only do I have my YouTube channel, which includes nice beginner friendly tutorials of the fibre arts, in particular of loom weaving, needle felting, and macrame. But I also have a Patreon that goes along with this podcast, and you'll find it under Not Weave Stitch. And there you can join the community to have nice chats. I can answer any questions that you may have as well. And it's really just a nice place to build up a community of like-minded crafters. So feel free to have a look at my Patreon. I'm also currently looking for other crafters to appear on the podcast. So I am currently doing some very exciting interviews with fellow crafters in different craft areas. So I am looking in particular for anyone who can do embroidery and knitting and would be willing to have a really nice relaxed chit chat on this podcast. So please don't feel like you need to be extremely experienced. If you've only just even got into it, if you maybe have a small business, I'd love to hear from you and we can have a nice chat about your journey, your tips for other beginner crafters, and you can also discuss how you got into your business, or maybe if you're doing it just as a hobby, why have you started it as your hobby? Has it been for your mental health or any other reasons? It'd be really nice to hear from you. So please do feel free to get in contact with me, and I'd love to be able to sit down and have a chat with you on this podcast. So as ever, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.